Ontario's police oversight system is a model for the rest of Canada. This province was 20 years ahead of the rest of the country and much of the world when it first established the Special Investigations Unit, a fully independent civilian body that conducts criminal investigations in cases where police are involved in serious injury or death. Everyone here knows today the SIU's history. It was born out of turmoil and controversy. And turmoil and controversy have surrounded it ever since. The SIU's work is serious, fraught with tension, and never easy. It is criticized for being too tough, criticized for being too timid. But despite all this, the SIU is something Ontarians can be proud of. The SIU has been described quite rightly as a bulwark of democracy because it promises the kind of strong, independent oversight that enhances the credibility and accountability of every police service in the province. The problem I'm here to talk to you about today is that the government has not allowed the SIU to deliver on its promise. On a dit que cet organisme, avec justesse, que c'est un rempart de la démocratie, car il permet le type de surveillance puissante et indépendante qui renforce la crédibilité et la responsabilité de tous les services de police dans la province. Le problème dont je veux parler aujourd'hui, c'est que le gouvernement n'a pas permis à l'UES de tenir sa promesse. 3 years ago, I submitted a report to the government on my first investigation of the Special Investigations Unit, in which I found that it was failing to conduct rigorous investigation and suffering from a pro-police bias. I said the SIU was behaving like a toothless tiger. I called on the SIU to make improvements. And I'm happy to say that under the new director, who's been there since 1 month after the report was released in 2008, it has come a long way. But my most important recommendation was that the Ontario government support the SIU with new legislation to clarify and strengthen its mandate and authority. For a bulwark of democracy, the SIU's legal foundation is embarrassingly flimsy. It was created in haste as an amendment to the Police Services Act. For more than 20 years, key parts of that mandate have been in doubt. Officials from police services, the SIU, and government continue to fight over it, while the public loses confidence in all three. Their only recourse has been to go to court, as 2 of the families featured in our report recently did. The Court of Appeal stepped into the leadership vacuum left by the government and declared that police under SIU investigation aren't supposed to have association lawyers vetting their notes. It shouldn't be this way. Ontarians deserve better, and so do our police. Ontario was on the right track when it created the SIU with a bold vision of complete independence and investigative authority. But as we've seen over the past 21 years, that vision can't be realized if the government doesn't stand behind the SIU. Many of you will remember that in 2008, the Ministry of the Attorney General welcomed my recommendations and said it would discuss them with stakeholders. Many of you asked me in 2009 why not much had happened, and again in 2010. When I launched this investigation, I discovered that the ministry really had no intention on acting on my recommendations. Even more disturbing, it was actively working against the director in his effort to do as I suggested. There are many stories in this report of cases that illustrate the problems the SIU continue to face. But nothing paints a picture better than the sad litany of Director Scott's letters. He sent 227 letters to police chiefs in the past 3 years. Polite letters documenting issues, advising them that they risked violating the Police Services Act by failing to notify or cooperate with the SIU. He received only 20 substantive responses to his letters. Most of the time, police services, including the largest ones in the province, blatantly disregarded their watchdog. Yet, what did the Ministry of the Attorney General do? The ministry that is supposed to uphold the law, enforce the law. It told Director Scott to stop drawing attention to noncompliance. Don't make waves. Don't publish your annual reports. Don't complain about lawyers vetting police notes, even though, as it turns out, the Ontario Court of Appeal says it's prohibited and contrary to law. The ministry has failed the SIU, and by doing so, it has failed the public and the police. Even after having the chance to review the report, its response was only vague generalities and a pledge to review the SIU and police-related issues within the next 2 years. It has clearly sought to avoid controversy and tension between it, the police, and the SIU. Mais ça ne devrait pas être une affaire de controverse. Ce qui devrait être en jeu, c'est le maintien d'un système de surveillance qui a la valeur pour le gouvernement de l'Ontario et dans lequel tous les Ontariens, y compris la police, peuvent avoir confiance. Un système suffisamment important pour justifier une législation claire et forte. Les demi-mesures ne suffisent pas et les tentatives de passer les tensions sous silence ne font qu'empirer la situation. This should not be about controversy. It should be about upholding an oversight system that the Government of Ontario values and all Ontarians, including police, can trust. A system that is important enough to warrant clear, strong legislation, half measures clearly are not working, and attempts to soothe tensions through silence have only made matters worse. If strong, independent civilian oversight of police is important to Ontario, as successful governments have said since 1990, then it's long past time to do the right thing and give the SIU the tools and foundation it needs to do its job. Be happy to take your questions.
I'd like the last one.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. You know, in many ways, I think the government is hoping for a magical consensus to emerge. And it just won't happen. The animosity between the SIU and the police is palpable and is at an all-time high. I think police are running roughshod over the SIU. The attacks from the police unions and the police chiefs have been searing. You know, you may not think Ian Scott is charming, but he's both prosecuted and defended the police in private practice. And I've seen nothing else than diligent work on his part. Yet he's characterized in police circles as acting in a rogue fashion. He's continually demonized and vilified. You know, there was a criminal charge laid of sexual assault against a Toronto Police Service officer that's documented in the report, where he was accused of launching into a political witch hunt, frivolous charge. Well, that person was convicted last month. We are all familiar with Toronto Chief of Police Bill Blair characterizing one of the videotapes during the G20 that the SIU had relied on as being doctored and fabricated, tampered. He later had to retract and apologize. He's been complained about to the Law Society of Upper Canada. He's been sued again and again. And he's responded by documenting 227 instances, fully a third of the cases occurring in this time frame, where there were police difficulties in cooperation. Now, interestingly, the Ministry of the Attorney General has to work hand in glove with the Ministry of Community, Safety and Correctional Services, who oversees the police in this province. And sadly, none of these issues have been in any meaningful way pursued by the government to fix them. So to answer your question, do I think this could just fall by the wayside? Of course I do. But I'm hopeful that there will be a resolution of these issues. because too much depends on it. You know, this is a law and order issue, right? It's a law and order issue. And except those that need to respect the law or the police. And you know, there's no convergence of interests. The police unions in this province are loyal to their members. They're there to protect the police. They're not there to nail bad cops. The Toronto Police Service Association's website has a banner on it that says, "We protect those who protect you." And I have no problem with that. But to expect that somehow a magical consensus will arrive where police unions will agree with the government, same thing with the police chiefs, is, like I said, expecting the impossible. So I think this is a situation where the government needs to recognize that it needs to uphold the public interest and recognize that it may not overlap with the private interests involved of the police chiefs and the police associations.
Pourquoi, selon vous, le gouvernement ne veut pas clarifier le rôle et renforcer le pouvoir de l'unité des enquêtes? Qu'est-ce qu'il gagne, selon vous?
Je pense que le gouvernement s'attend qu'il y ait un consensus entre les partis, entre les associations, les syndicats de police, les chefs de police. Et puis, il n'y aura pas ce consensus-là. Parce que ces groupes-là défendent leurs intérêts, qui sont des intérêts privés et non pas des intérêts publics. Et je crois que le gouvernement a peur de ces deux groupes de gens-là, les chefs de police et les syndicats de police. Et pour cette raison, on n'a pas vu grand développement dans ce domaine.
It doesn't seem like the government's going to cede to your wish to change the laws or introduce new ones to bolster the SIU. I mean, have you had any signals that they might? Because it doesn't seem to be in the letters from Siegel and others that there's any indication that they want to do this.
Well, the letters are couched in ways that, you know, would allow them to move significantly. So my job here is to advocate at this stage for those changes to happen. You know, if I had to draw up a minimalist wish list, you know, the issue of serious injury. In 21 years in Ontario, the 58 police services can't agree on what serious injury is. And in some respect, sometimes I would think that there's almost 58 different definitions in existence. Well, there's a need to clarify what serious injury is. You know, in the report we talk about cases of fractured faces, broken bones, broken noses, septic poisoning, large bodily lacerations. You know, the OPP took upon themselves to redefine when the SIU is notified. They came out with an edict saying that before you call the SIU, you have to conclude that there's an element of criminality there. Excuse me, that's the role of the SIU, not the notifying police agency. So I'm hopeful that, you know, in terms of special serious injury, that it doesn't make sense to have each police agency define when they call the SIU. And I'm hoping as well that the government understands that it needs to exercise leadership here. It's not for the Ontario Court of Appeal to step in and resolve these issues. Right now, in your own paper today, for example, there's another story about how the Ontario Court of Appeal, again, is having to decide a thorny SIU issue. Those are public policy issues that should be decided by the government, one way or another. But instead, the SIU director, in a recent case, got reprimanded in 2010 for an Ottawa police case where he was told that he had relapsed, quote unquote. It's almost as if it's some kind of a disease to report on issues involving the police.
You had a very scathing report on the GA, and now you have this one here. Are the police out of control in this province?
I don't think so. I mean, you know, I respect the role of police associations and police unions. I think they do a very important role. And I have no difficulty in them saying we protect everyone, the good and the bad apples. I have no issue with that. But the issue that I do have is that the government has to accept that it has a public interest that supersedes the private interest, and that's not happening here. To have the director of the SIU issue 227 letters to chiefs of police and have a less than 10% response, and this didn't happen by happenstance, it happened because the Association of Chiefs of Police decided, and this is in the report, they passed a resolution advising chiefs of police to ignore letters from Ian Scott. So it's not a happy situation. So I wouldn't say they're out of control, but I think that they need to be brought under control, and the government cannot abdicate its function of enforcing the law and of making sure that the rule of law applies to the police as well. Part of the reason this is happening, and part of the reason they're flaunting the law is because they have no consequence. What happens to the police who decides not to cooperate with the police, with the SIU? What happens to them? Nothing happens in the current system. Nothing happens to police chiefs who don't respond to the SIU. So it happens because it can happen. So apart from serious injury, the one area that I think is prime for the government to address is the issue of having consequences on police who don't cooperate. Why do people cooperate with my office? It's because if they don't, they're committing an offense and they can end up in jail. Why isn't a similar regime in place for people who don't cooperate, for police who don't cooperate with the SIU? Rather, it's left families like the Minty and the Schaeffers to bring their cases to court, to sue, to get the courts to declare what the act says or doesn't say. It's costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars, an enormous amount of personal resources to get the court to do what the government should have done before.
Can you talk about repression of that annual report? I'm not quite clear on why that's important. Could you try and make it...
The what, sorry?
The annual report.
Oh, yes.
Can you explain why this matters? Are we talking cover-up here? Or is that...
No, you know what it is? The SIU is an arm's length agency of the provincial government. It's arm's length because we recognize that when you conduct criminal investigations, you have to be able to do it without interference by the rest of government. What happened here and what we talk about in the report is that the director of the SIU got censured. He was not able to report publicly on the activities of the SIU. And that was an interference with the independence of the SIU.
I was just wondering if you could characterize or elaborate on what your investigation found in terms of the relationship between the ministry and police chiefs. And I'm just looking at, this briefing note that you mentioned from March 2009, where they say that they won't be going ahead with enacting that legislation that you recommended, largely due to vehement police opposition. Is the relationship between the government and police too cozy? Should the police be really telling the ministry what kind of legislation it can and cannot enact?
No, of course not. I think the government has to act in the public interest. And they can't expect that after 21 years of vehement opposition, after 8 reports on the SIU, that some magical consensus will emerge. So I think it's incumbent upon the government to act. And as I've mentioned, there are some areas that are so clear. The definition of serious injury is one of them. Having consequences to the lack of cooperation is one of them. Thirdly, enacting a statute, a proper statute. And the fourth one, I would say, is the publication of the director's report. When there's no criminal charges, the SIU director reports back to the Attorney General as to why he didn't lay a charge. Well, that report is currently treated as a state secret. Imagine if you were the family of someone who's been shot and killed, somebody injured. Wouldn't you want to know what the circumstances were that led to the SIU director not laying a charge? This is 2011. This was wrong in 1990 when the legislation failed to provide for this level of transparency and disclosure. Fast forward 21 years later, we're in an era of open government, everything's online, social media, Web 2.0. Citizens want to know how they're governed. especially if it involves the death of one of their family or friends or family, and there's no criminal charge. Well, they want answers. Why is it, after 8 reports, studies of this, you have recommended this point? Why is it that those reports are still kept secret? Breeds mistrust in the SIU.
What's your message to family members? You mentioned family members who may have had someone injured or perhaps killed in a police action. If they're looking to the SIU for justice, can they get it? Should they? Are they looking to the wrong place?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think the SIU right now has really done a great job at cleaning shop and is maximizing on the tools it has. And I mentioned the conviction of a Toronto Police Service officer for sexual assault during a traffic stop. The Salami Margie case where there was a conviction. So I think the SIU is taking its role seriously. I think it's not without hope, but I think we need to straighten out the mandate. There's way too many cases that are going on right now that are going unreported or being reported months, days, weeks after the fact, and they're not allowing the SIU to be as thorough as it wants to be. And these matters need to be fixed.
André, do you think you'll...
Oui.
Donnez-moi des exemples concrets des problèmes que vous soulevez. Et dites-moi, est-ce que vous êtes déçu? Vous avez soulevé ce même genre de question en 2008 et visiblement rien n'a changé.
Évidemment, je suis déçu, mais je n'ai pas perdu tout espoir. Les problèmes qu'on a découverts, c'est tout d'abord lorsqu'il y a des lésions sérieuses ou la mort, l'unité des enquêtes spéciales n'est pas toujours avertie des circonstances. Et donc, l'unité des enquêtes spéciales ne peut pas déclencher son mandat et remplir ses obligations sans qu'elle sache qu'il s'est passé quelque chose. Donc, il faut rectifier la définition, il faut clarifier la définition de ce qu'on veut dire par blessure grave. Deuxièmement, il faut prévoir des conséquences au corps policier et aux policiers qui ne collaborent pas pleinement avec l'unité des enquêtes spéciales. Troisièmement, le rapport du directeur de l'unité des enquêtes spéciales, lorsqu'il n'a pas d'accusation criminelle, devrait être rendu public. Et quatrièmement, il devrait y avoir un modèle législatif qui contient tous les pouvoirs et les obligations des parties lorsque le mandat de l'unité des enquêtes spéciales est déclenché.
André, you said your report encompasses sort of, I think, October 18th, 2008 till last Halloween. And during that period, Chris Bentley was the Attorney General the whole time. He's since been replaced by John Gerritsen. Do you think that there will be any change, given that a lot of the problems seem to emanate from the McMurtry-Scott building on Bay Street?
You know, I'm always hopeful that a fresh set of eyes will bring something to the table. I don't think the problem, can be tied to Chris Bentley as a person. I think that those who've been around the issue for a long time tend to become desensitized to it. It's like, oh, well, we all know the SIU, it's got problems. So I'm certainly hopeful that a fresh set of eyes will allow for a new perspective and some hope that things will change.
Does your indignation stem from the fact that the government, according to this internal memo, clearly has no intention of implementing the recommendations from your last report, or is it more a systemic problem? Where does it come from?
Oh, it's a systemic problem. I don't think any of this issue relies on personalities. I don't think this comes down to anyone being of bad faith. And I don't certainly think any of the parties involved are of bad faith. I think that it's a systemic issue, and I think they're colliding interests. And my job is to remind the government that they have to act in the public interest. Thank you very much.